لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له كلمة جعل الإخلاص تأويلها وضمن القلوب موصولها وأنار في التفكر معقولها. These were the sentences from the sermon of Fatima al-Zahra Salamullah alayha in the Masjid al-Nabi, addressing the companions. Now, we said that with La ilaha illallah, Lady Fatima Salamullah alayha has actually explored three aspects of this great message of the Prophet. You remember the Prophet used to say, Qulu la ilaha illallah tuflahu. Say la ilaha illallah and you will prosper. You will succeed in your endeavors in life and in hereafter. So what is the real deeper insight into la ilaha illallah? Now the first thing we discussed last night was what was mentioned by our great Siddiqa, kalimatan ja'ala al-ikhlasa ta'wilaha. This is of course a sentence, but the ta'wil of it is ikhlas. The way it translates into your actions, it should be ikhlas. It means that la ilaha illallah in itself, of course, is something you utter. However, it has some implications. There is nothing to be absorbed to be attracted to be obedient to be subservient to, except Allah. Now, these things we may say, however, they may manifest itself. They should manifest itself in our actions. And when they manifest itself in our actions, this is the ta'wil of La ilaha illallah in what we do, and this is the meaning of ikhlas. Ikhlas means purity. Now, purity in action and purity in one's soul and heart, both of them have this meaning of khulus, but with certain difference I mentioned now. Before proceeding further, let me just read to you a hadith from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. In explanation of the verse in Surah Mulk, الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. Allah has created life and death to test you, to see who is best in conduct. Who is best in conduct. This is a very, very interesting terminology, ahsanu amala, and very insightful purpose of our creation. It doesn't say to test you to see who is good and who is bad. No. To test you to see who is better and who is better and who is still better. What about those who are bad? That's not my purpose of creation. I have created this life to see who would somehow move up the ladder of vicinity to me, comes closer and closer and closer. لِيَبْلُوكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Now this is a different discussion. However, the discussion is between the Imam alayhi salam and Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Sufyan ibn Uyayna is a very respectful Sunni scholar. Very famous, of course, a contemporary of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Usually he came and discussed matters with Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and the discussion between Sufyan ibn Uyayna and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq shows how the Sunni world actually was reacting to the teachings of A'immah alayhi salam, and how certain things had to be rectified by the Imam. Because usually they thought that the more you pray, the more you fast, the more you recite the Quran, without any deep understanding, that's enough. Now, Imam is actually rejecting that idea here. He says, لَيْسَ يَعْنِي أَكْثَرُ عَمَلًا. When Allah says, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, it doesn't mean أَكْثَرُ عَمَلًا, the one who acts more. I don't think at the time of Amirul Mu'minin anyone acted more on salat and fast and recitation of the Quran than the Khawarij, who were the predecessors of ISIS. The same mentality, the same thought. So it doesn't mean that these have to actually go beyond your tongue, go beyond your mind. It should penetrate into your heart and soul. So لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, to test you to see who is best in conduct, doesn't mean أَكْثَرُ عَمَلًا, the one who does it more. No. وَإِنَّمَا الْإِصَابَةِ, it's وَلَكِنْ أَصْوَبُكُمْ عَمَلًا, the one who does it more correctly. Aswab. Isaba means to hit the target, isn't it? To do it something rightly. Now, Ahsanukum amala means aswabukum amala. Now, what is isaba? What is correctness? What is rectitude in doing these things? Innamal isaba khashyatullah was niyatu sadiqa wal hasana. First of all, it should create in you khashya. Khashya is an experience of God's presence. This is khashya. It's different from khawf. Khawf is, or taqwa, this is fearing from consequences of our acts. That's something we fear about future. Khashya is when you experience the presence of God, and that experience creates awe in your heart. This is what the worship should do to you. If it doesn't, it means it is not isaba, you are not hitting the target. So, إِنَّمَا الْإِصَابَةُ خَشْيَةُ اللَّهِ وَالنِّيَّةُ الصَّادِقَةُ, and things should be done with good intention, and with good intention and not creating mischief. Some people do things with good intention but create mischief. Well, Hassan, of course, it should create benevolence, it should create kindness, it should create good for humanity. This is, of course, isaba. ثم قال, then he said, you know, you start an act, you want to do it for the sake of God. You start it for the sake of God, but then things lead you to somehow divert from that very pure thing that you are doing for God. ثم قال الإبقاء على العمل حتى يخلص أشد من العمل. To keep on going and making the act to be pure for the sake of God is more difficult than the act itself. والعمل الخالص الذي لا يريد أن يحمدك عليه أحد إلا الله. What is amalul khalis? What is pure act for God? Is that you do it only for the sake of God. You don't want to be praised for it. Actually, you don't care anymore. Your love, your attention, your direction, everything is towards God. That's why you don't care at all. It's not important for you what people say about you. Whether they praise you or criticize you, it's not important for you now. What is important for you is that you are absorbed to God's greatness, to God's love. Now, why this is important? Because it changes us. It changes our soul. It changes our hearts. It's not, we don't do it because of God. God doesn't need it. God doesn't need amalul khalis. Ala lillahi dinul khalis. Deen should be khalis for Allah. However, for your own sake, not for Allah. Okay? It changes things in you. Now, the ta'wil of La ilaha illallah is ikhlas. In action, you do things for the sake of God, and then you manifest La ilaha illallah in your soul, in your hearts. Then it goes beyond the acts, beyond the action. It goes beyond the action. the action is pure for God, you continuously do it purely for God, and when you say purely for God, it doesn't happen overnight. You have to increase in knowledge about God, you have to increase in love for God, and love, of course, needs knowledge, because you cannot love someone who you do not know. You cannot say, oh God, I love you, but I don't know you. No, there should be some knowledge so that that love comes. Now, when acts continue to be purely for God, then that purity spills over into one's heart. And not only the acts would become pure, the person would become pure as well. So, from the state of mukhlis is someone who tries to purify his acts, he would become a mukhlas. God purifies his soul. The acts would purify him, and when he becomes purified, of course he becomes like Ayyuma alayhi salam. There is an extent to which we can do ikhlas and purify, and there are other levels of purity which is not in our hand. God should take us there, and one would become mukhlas. And when you become mukhlas, when someone becomes mukhlas, then of course he knows God, he can describe God, he can talk about God. You know, when I talk about God, I talk about God of what I've heard from the Prophet and from the Imams. I cannot talk about God on my own accord. If I do it, you have to reject me. Yeah. Whenever I talk about God or God's ruling, God's attributes, you have to ask me, okay, who has said this? Where is it written? Why do you ask that from me? Because I'm not an authority. That automatically means that you do not accept me as an authority rightly, because I'm not an authority. Why? Because only mukhlasoon could talk about God. Subhanallah. Amma yasifun illa ibadallah al-mukhlasin. God is above whatever they describe except the mukhlasoon, those who are purified. Why they can talk about God? Because by purity, God opens their heart. Knowledge comes down to their heart. And they can speak of knowledge. They can speak based on knowledge, not based on conjecture. So when we discuss with each other, usually you see the friends sit around each other and talk about God. In my opinion, God should be like that. In my opinion, God should do that. In my opinion, God should be like that. No, these are all just vain talk. Who has said God should be like this? Who has said God has such an attribute? Anything, any description of God not coming from these mukhlasin is just vain talk. You cannot accept. There is no authority. It's not authorized talk about God. So when La ilaha illallah manifests itself in one's heart and soul, it would elevate the person towards God. It would give the knowledge of God to him. And therefore, the ta'wil of La ilaha illallah, which is ikhlas, would raise a person towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, the ta'wil of La ilaha illallah is ikhlas. Ja'ala al-ikhlasa ta'wilaha. This is one aspect that Fatima Zahra, peace be upon her, mentioned. The other aspect, وَضَمَّنَ الْقُلُوبَ مَوْصُولَهَا. Mawsul is the meaning, the reference for what we say, the reference for the sentence. Now, you say La ilaha illallah, what's the reference for it? What's the meaning for it? Where can we find the true meaning of it? The true meaning of it you cannot find except in your heart. زَمَّنَ الْقُلُوبَ مَوْصُولَهَا. The reference for this meaning is in the heart. Now, there's always this question, can we see God? Well, yes, we can see God, but seeing God needs a different faculty, not eyes. You cannot see God with eyes. In a sense, you can say, you should say, can we have knowledge of God? Yes, we can have knowledge of God. Not just philosophizing about God. Knowledge of God in the sense that you know something of Him. You know something of Him. Last year we discussed, when we talked about Siddiqa, we discussed about the station of Siddiqeen, which one of the most important of it is knowledge. However, every human heart has a way to God. You can see God by your heart. By seeing, it's just like when you want to understand something, you say, I see. I see doesn't mean that you see by your eyes, you comprehend. There is a faculty in our soul which can comprehend God. And this we can say, we see God. There is no name for it. We call it ma'rifah. But there is no name for what that faculty leads us to. Now, eyes, it leads us to see. The ears, it leads us to hear. However, the heart, it leads us to what? We don't know what to say. To see, to comprehend God, to know God. We have no name for it. But there is a ma'rifah coming into the heart when you truly believe in La ilaha illallah. Usually when people talk about why can't we see God, I ask them, can you see, for example, can you see the smell of the fragrance of lavender, for example? Can you see it? Yes, you can see it in the sense that you can smell it. You can comprehend it. You cannot see the sound, but you can hear the sound. You cannot hear the color, but you can see the color. We can comprehend, but there are different faculties for it. About God, yes, you cannot see the God with your eyes. You cannot hear His voice with your ears. However, there is a faculty, that is heart, in which His ma'rifah comes. And that, again, requires purity. The heart, which is the center of the soul, we don't mean this physical heart, it's the center of the soul. It gives life to the soul. As the heart gives life to the body, that heart, spiritual heart, gives life to the soul when it receives the knowledge from God. And it's through that heart that we comprehend God in the day of judgment. We see Him. وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. There are certain faces on that day which are quite fresh, delightful, because they are looking at their Lord. Looking what? With the heart. So, رَمَّنَ الْقُلُوبَ مَوْصُولَهَا. So, the meaning of La ilaha illallah, the reference to it, you can find it in your hearts. But why don't we find God in our hearts, usually? We try to pray, we have a sort of very thin connection. Something in us tells us that we have to be grateful to God, we have to worship God, but sometimes it's not very strong. Sometimes it becomes strong, but sometimes, most of the time it's not very strong. Why? Because our attention is diverted towards other things. We are preoccupied by what God has given us, and we do not think about God Himself. And this is, of course, a sort of calamity for human beings. So, رَمَّنَ الْقُلُوبَ مَوْصُولَهَا, and, of course, it's not only in the hearts. وَأَنَارَ فِي التَّفَكُّرِ مَعْقُولَهَا. Now, if someone hasn't started to get that enlightenment in the heart, if someone hasn't started to acting based on La ilaha illallah, is there a way to realize Allah? Is there a way to realize that there is no God in this world but Allah, the Creator? Yes, intellect, reasoning. There is something lit in our mind about God, we can look at His signs and we can realize that He's there. La ilaha illallah is a word. It is manifested in your intellect, it's manifested in your heart, it's manifested in your actions. So this is the way Fatima Zahra, peace be upon her, starts her khutbah in the mosque. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah kalimatan ja'ala al-ikhlasa ta'wilaha wa dhammana al-quluba mawsulaha wa anara fi at-tafakkuri ma'qulaha. Very deep, of course. Now, then, as someone who is mukhlas, someone who is purified, she can now explain and talk about God. Al-mumtani'u min al-absari ru'yatuh. Of course, it's impossible for the eyes to see Him. We have some traditions which say that some of the mu'minun would see God in the hereafter, or it says that the Prophet saw God when he went to Mi'raj. All these traditions are either wrong, not authentic, or they should refer to seeing by the heart, not seeing by the eyes. It's impossible, whether it's in this world, whether it's in Akhirah, whether it's in paradise, something which is not physical. How can you see with your eyes? It is not possible. Unless if, of course, it is manifested in His creation, like what we are seeing. We are seeing, of course, the power of God, the manifestation of His names. Yes, these are visible, but the essence of God can never be seen. Al-mumtani'u min al-absari ru'yatuh wa min al-alsuni sifatuh. You cannot ascribe any attribute to Him because He's above every attribute. Only names manifest this. This is, of course, I don't want to go into details about it because this opens a sort of different avenue of discussion. وَمِنَ الْأَوْهَامِ كَيْفِيَّتُهُ. And no imagination can ever imagine how He is. And that's true. Whatever you think about God and you say this is how God is, that is your creation. God cannot be captured by imagination. What about hereafter when we go to the next world? No, still the imagination cannot capture the essence of God. What we see until eternity are just manifestations of His names. Then she says something very important which I want to discuss now and end my talk tonight. Dhara'aha talks about creation. Dhara'aha bimashiyatih, kawwanaha biqudratihi. Created the creation with His power. Wa dhara'aha bimashiyatih. And started it, spread it with His will. من غير حاجة منه إلى تكوينها ولا فائدة له في تصويرها إلا تثبيتا لحكمته وتنبيها على طاعته. He created everything without any need for His creation. وَلَا فَائِدَةَ لَهُ فِي تَصْوِيرَهَا. And there was no benefit in giving its forms except to reconfirm His wisdom and to allude to the creation that they should obey Him. Now, what does this mean? First of all, does God have a purpose in creation? This is a question usually asked by many people. What is the purpose of God creating us? Here we have to distinguish between two different things. The purpose of the creation, the creator, and the purpose of the created. We are the created. What is the purpose of the created? Quran talks about this purpose very in length. First of all, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I've created jinn and ins to worship me. This is not the purpose of God or for what He is doing. It is purpose of the created. Our purpose is to worship and to grow by worship. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Our purpose is to be tested here in this world, to be seen who is better in conduct, and then of course in the next world we go closer to Him based on what we do, and we continue worshipping Him. That's our purpose. This is the purpose of the created. But what is the purpose of God Himself in creating us? What's the purpose of the Creator? Now, some people have mentioned a statement which they claim is a hadith. It may be a hadith, but if it's hadith, it should be interpreted in a different way. They say that كنت كنزا مخفيا فأحببت أن أعرف فخلقت الخلق لكي أعرف. I was a hidden treasure. I liked to be known. Then I created the creation to be known. So this is my purpose. Now, if this is true, the question, did God need to be known? It was Kanzan Makhfiya. I was hidden treasure. So what was the need to be known for Him? This is something strange if we say that the purpose of God for creation was to be known. If we do not accept this, then what is the purpose of God in creation? I don't know whether you have ever thought about this yourself or not. Now, I want to say something very strange here. And that is what, of course, is in a different way is mentioned in this khutbah. And that is, you cannot talk about God's purpose because this is a human thing. Purpose is what is in human to attain something which they don't have. Purpose is to get a perfection which is not existent at the moment. This is purpose. And that's why every creation of God, from the angels to the lowest of creation, they have purpose. Every human being should have purpose. And that purpose exists here, it exists in the hereafter, it exists in paradise. We always have purpose. Why? Because we always need something to attain which adds to our perfection. But about someone who has everything, who is absolutely perfect, is there anything that he should attain? No, there is no purpose there. So you cannot talk about purpose of God the way you talk about purpose of human being. It's not possible. You know, it's like what? It's like the question, when did God create this world? Have you ever thought about this? When did God start to create this world? Okay, the question is wrong. Because God created time by creating the world. So before the time there is no when, there is no meaning for it. So you cannot ask when did God create the world. And you cannot ask what is the purpose of God in creating the world, because that is a human thing again. And this is what Fatima Zahra is saying here. She says that He created tathbitan lihikmatih, to reconfirm His wisdom. That is, His wisdom is actually, His perfection is flowing out. It's not for Him to attain something, it's to make others to attain something. And that's not a purpose per se, like what we talk about the purpose. And then for what He has created, for everything that He has created, there is a purpose. every single human being, every single animal, every single angel, they have a purpose in their endeavor, in their journey towards God. And the purpose, of course, the ultimate purpose is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the ultimate purpose is Allah, and Allah is infinite, so our journey is infinite. From here to infinity, we will journey towards God, towards perfection, and we are going to see excitements. The way we have come to this world and we have seen excitement in this world, there are lots and lots of more excitements when we move to the hereafter, when we move to Barzakh, when we move to paradise. And these excitements become more and more exciting as we move closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people say, when we go to paradise, do we have any purpose? Actually, we don't know what is purpose in this world. Yes, when we go to paradise, the purpose becomes real, not just like play and sport of this world, which is, every purpose is like a play because it ends very soon, it comes to an end. There the purpose is real. Now, what is the purpose of people like Fatima to Zahra, people like the Prophet, people like Amirul Mu'mineen, to have been elevated to such a high position? Of course, it is for us to follow them, for us to learn from them, from these words of wisdom. In Surah Yusuf alayhi salam, Yusuf mentions that Allah has purified us. We do not commit shirk in any way. This La ilaha illallah has manifested itself in us in its ultimate form. ذَلِكَ مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْنَا وَعَلَى النَّاسِ. This is a grace of God on us and on people. Because people, by looking at us, they can come closer. Alhamdulillah, these role models which are set for us, like the Prophet, like Fatima Zahra, like Amirul Mu'mineen, they are set at a very high level that no matter how much we endeavor, we cannot finish, exhaust our journey towards them. And a real role model should be like that. That no matter to what level you reach, to what level of ma'rifah you reach, you still look up to them. You still look up to learn from them. And the problem is that these people cannot be tolerated in society. These people cannot be, because they are not like other people, because everyone else would see that they are much higher, they cannot be tolerated. And this is what happened, of course, to Fatima al-Zahra, peace be upon her. And of course to Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet, to Prophet himself. There is one very heartbreaking story, account of when Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam finished burying Fatima, peace be upon her. And he stood crying on the grave, turning towards the grave, towards the mosque of the Prophet where he was buried. And he said, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulallah anni wa an ibnatika an-nazilati fi jawarik as-sari'ati al-lahaq bik. Ya Rasulallah, I greet you from myself and from your daughter who very quickly joined you, very quickly came to your side. However, of course, she prospers now beside you. She has come in a better world. But what should I do? قَلَّ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ عَنْ صَفِيَّتِكَ صَبْرِي وَرَقَّ عَنْهَا تَجَلُّدِي. Ya Rasulallah, now my patience has come to its limits. Now that you have gone, your daughter has gone, Fatima has gone, my patience has come to its limits. قَلَّ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ عَنْ صَفِيَّتِكَ صَبْرِي وَرَقَّ عَنْهَا تَجَلُّدِي فَإِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ راجعون فَلَقَدْ اسْتُرْجَعَتِ الْوَدِيعَةِ Now what you had left with me, the trust is returned to you. وأخذت الرهينة أما حزني فسرمد وأما ليلي فمسحى ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد.
صلوات.